So one of the things that I sometimes get asked by people is, how do you begin to approach self-inquiry? And so this is something that's sometimes asked for people who have heard about practices such as asking the question, who am I? Or they might have heard about practices such as asking the question, who is having this thought? But these practices might seem too sort of inaccessible. If you find yourself trying out these kind of practices and just feeling confused, then that could be an indication that these practices are perhaps a step further down the line. And they are quite advanced self-inquiry practices, or Jnana Yoga practices. And so one of the practices that I've used for many years, and which is perhaps easier to begin with, is an inquiry practice that inquires into the nature of objects. So it inquires into the nature of phenomena, or things that can arise, or things that we can see, things that we can smell, touch, taste, and think about and feel, and so on. So an inquiry into the nature of things that are perceived. And so it's perhaps easier because it's not going directly to the question, who am I? It's not going directly to the kind of source of inquiry into the self, or self with a capital S. And so it's kind of coming at it in a more roundabout way, in a more gentle way. And the practice works like this. Whenever an object arises in our awareness, in our consciousness, we can ask 3 questions about it. And the first question is it permanent? Or is it impermanent? The second question is, does it lead to lasting happiness or lasting satisfaction? And the third question is it who or what I am? And so for kind of objects in the world, this is quite an easy practice. So if we see a tree, then we can ask ourselves the question, is this tree permanent? It obviously isn't, because at some point it'll die and disintegrate into the ground. We can ask ourselves the question, is this object going to lead to lasting happiness or lasting satisfaction? And because we know its nature is impermanent, it obviously isn't going to. And then we can ask the question, is this object who or what I am? And it obviously isn't, because we're aware of it. So with objects in the world, this is a very easy practice. And you can take any object, a mountain or a cup, or a star, or a river, or a house, and the answers coming up are always pretty easy, and they're always the same. When the practice becomes a bit more tricky is when we begin to use mental objects like thoughts or memories or feelings, because they're a bit closer to home and we tend to identify with them a bit more strongly. So you can see a kind of sticky quality arises when it comes to mental objects. So if we see a thought arising in our mind, we can ask the question, is this thought permanent or impermanent? It's obviously impermanent, because thoughts are very fleeting. They arise and dissolve quite quickly. Is this thought going to bring lasting happiness or lasting satisfaction? And so again, if it's a thought, then it's fleeting, it's quite impermanent. It's not going to bring lasting happiness or lasting satisfaction. And then the third question is this thought, who or what I am? And this is where the practice becomes a bit trickier, or a bit stickier, you could say, Because quite often we do identify with our thoughts. We do tend to think that we are what we think. We identify so strongly with our thoughts that we feel they're part of us, or part of what makes up who we are. And essentially, for the purposes of this practice, if we are aware of something, then we are the observer, and then the object that we're aware of is the observed. So there's subject and object. There's the thing that's observing, which is who we are, and then there's the thing that arises as an object of consciousness, and that's what we're aware of. So for the purposes of this practice, fundamentally, if we're aware of something, then it's not who we are, it's not what we are. So this is a kind of process by which we can take a step back, we can come back into being aware of our true nature as pure awareness. And the same thing can happen with feelings or emotions. As emotions arise, this is another area that can be quite sticky, because we also identify quite often and quite strongly with our emotions. Like, I am the person who feels this way. I am the person who has these particular feelings or emotions. And so then we can use the same thing. If we're aware of something, then it's arising and passing away in our awareness, and it's not who or what we are. And so we use the same process, asking the same three questions. If a feeling arises, is it permanent or impermanent? Is it going to lead to lasting happiness or satisfaction? And is it who or what I am? And so the practice leads to a stepping back and a stepping back and a stepping back, and we're kind of loosening the grip that the mind often holds over us. The process of identification with mental objects is often quite strong, and it can take time for that kind of sticky quality to become loosened, time for attachments to become less. And so with a practice like this, we're sort of gradually loosening those strongly held attachments that we might have for certain mental objects. And we can see how, if we use this practice, we can see how the mind gradually becomes calmer as a result of using the practice. And as the mind becomes calmer, the practice actually becomes easier. When the mind is more calm and more peaceful, it's actually easier to do a practice like this, and to see how our identification with things can dissolve more easily with a quieter mind. And so this is still a self-inquiry practice, it's still a Jnana Yoga practice, just like asking the question, who am I? And it would still be necessary to have some degree of inner silence present in the mind for a practice like this to be effective. So there is a precondition to using practices like this. And that precondition is some degree of the witness, some degree of inner silence present in the mind. But once we've got that inner silence present, then a practice like this can be a very easy way to begin self-inquiry, an easy way to begin Jnana Yoga. And then if we use a practice like this for some time, then gradually we find it easier and easier to use other forms of self-inquiry. They kind of follow on naturally from something like this. And so if we're engaged in yoga, we can use a practice like this at any time during the day. It doesn't have to be during our practice time on the mat. It could be as we sit quietly under a tree in the park or at any moment during the day. And we can start off just for 10 minutes a day, for example, doing a practice like this, and can gradually build it up so you're practicing for longer durations of time. But it's a practice that I've used personally for many years, and it's a very effective practice and does become a very beautiful practice as we start to see things just falling away in the mind. We start to see attachments simply falling away as we go deeper into the practice.